Greens as a tool? What's really behind the economic crisis? But before we begin the video, a question for you. Do you believe the US would sacrifice Germany's prosperity to secure its global dominance? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I'm curious about your insights. Today we're discussing a topic that affects us all, even though many people haven't paid much attention to it yet: the rapidly deteriorating economic situation in Germany and Europe. The question is, what role do the USA play in this? It sounds absurd to claim that the US is actively weakening the German economy. However, when we take a closer look at the facts, the picture that emerges seems much more plausible than it initially appears. The situation becomes particularly interesting when we examine the role of the Greens in Germany. This party, traditionally known for its strong stance on ecology and social justice, plays, knowingly or unknowingly, a crucial role in a much broader strategy. The strategy we're talking about goes far beyond Germany. We are dealing with geopolitical interests, shifting economic powers, and Europe's role on the global stage. But before we dive into this complicated issue, let's take a look back at an interesting document that surfaced a few years ago. About 2 years ago, in September 2020, an article was published that seemed like a forecast for the future economic developments in Germany and Europe. But this prediction wasn't a prophecy, it was part of a carefully planned strategy. This document came from the Rand Corporation, one of the most influential think tanks in the United States that focuses on geopolitical and economic issues. And what it describes could be the foundation of how America intends to solve its own economic problems at the expense of Europe, particularly Germany. The document reveals that the US could actively contribute to Europe's economic weakness to strengthen its own position. The plan? Destroy the German economy to transfer capital and production capacities to America. Extreme? Certainly. But let's take a closer look. In this context, the Greens in Germany, led by Annalena Baerbock and Robert Habeck, are seen as a decisive force. The document describes them as dogmatic and easy to control, making them the ideal tool to implement this plan. It is unclear whether these two politicians fully understand their role, but one thing is certain: their policies are contributing to plunging Germany into a deep economic crisis. The document, written in January 2022 before the war in Ukraine escalated, outlines how the US could overcome its economic difficulties at that time. The solution: transfer capital and production capacities from Europe, especially Germany, to the US. But how is this supposed to happen? The document provides a cold yet strategic answer: deliberately plunge Europe, especially Germany, into an economic crisis. This is where the Greens come into play. Their strong commitment to environmental and social issues has always been their defining feature, which makes them ideal partners in this context, according to the Rand Corporation. The document describes them as a decidedly dogmatic movement that will not abandon its ideological goals, even when the economic consequences are disastrous. Looking at the events of the past few years, this scenario appears frighteningly realistic. In January 2022, the Nord Stream gas pipeline was still in operation, and Germany benefited from cheap energy prices for Russian gas. But this was something that had to change. A Rand Corporation article suggested that an energy crisis in Europe would become inevitable once the pipeline was cut off. The analysis shows that without cheap Russian gas, the German industry would quickly lose its competitiveness and be forced to transfer production and capital to the US. And what do we see today? Exactly this scenario is unfolding before our eyes. Germany's energy-intensive industries, especially the chemical and metal sectors, are struggling to survive. Many companies have reduced or even relocated their production activities. Some have closed factories in Germany and instead opened new ones in the US, where the economic conditions are much more favorable. Perhaps the most dramatic aspect of this development is the role of the war in Ukraine. The Rand Corporation knew in January 2022 that this conflict would escalate. The text predicts that Russia would become the aggressor, and Europe, particularly Germany, would be forced to impose harsh sanctions on Russia. These sanctions would not only hurt Russia but, above all, Europe itself. Now the Greens are acting again. Their role in pushing for these sanctions should not be underestimated. They used the war as a pretext to act against Russia, simultaneously plunging the German economy into an existential crisis. The decision to stop Nord Stream 2, even before Russia's military intervention, was a pivotal turning point. However, the RAND article suggests that this step was not an isolated decision but part of a broader strategy. The Greens advocate for climate protection, human rights, and democracy, but ultimately, it is the U.S. economy that benefits the most from the consequences of these policies. The United States, which faced enormous economic challenges, has profited immensely from this development. While Europe struggles with expensive liquefied natural gas from the U.S. enjoys lower energy prices and a stronger industry. According to the paper, the Greens are the easiest political force to steer in Europe, and they have done exactly what was expected of them. And here is the fundamental question: is this really just a coincidence? Or is there a carefully thought-out strategy at play with the Greens playing a key role, either knowingly or unknowingly? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. As the German economy falters and the energy crisis deepens, one must ask whether Europe is being deliberately made dependent on the U.S. A weak Europe means that America doesn't have to fear economic and political competition from the continent. This might explain why the RAND Corporation spoke in 2022 about the need to weaken Europe in order to secure American hegemony. Now we want your opinion. Do you believe that these developments are deliberately orchestrated by the U.S. to weaken Europe? Or are they simply unfortunate political decisions that have led Germany into this situation? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss.